Reaching you live from Abuja. Like I said before the break, we'll be talking about the Niger coup aftermath, and I will still dwell a little bit on the ministerial screening. I'll be joined in the studio now by Mr. Kelechi Anu Esquire. He's a legal practitioner. He joins me now to do justice to the matter. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we'll start straight up with the Niger coup aftermath. The issue now is there have been varying comments here and there about how much Nigeria should be involved or not. Perhaps ECOWAS, because Nigeria fully or to an extent funds, that body. But I'd like to get your thoughts on the basics. First of all, what would you say about the matter so far? And on a basic level of understanding, what do you think is, or what do you say is going on, and how do you think the country should be, facing this?
I believe ECOWAS was very, very fast in their response and in their approach. They were not thorough with their thoughts and their actions. In the aftermath of the coup, we had ECOWAS swing into actions without analyzing their positions, the intricacies of their interests and what they stand to gain and lose. Now, if you look at the entire situation, you agree that the basis of what it is now has divided the ECOWAS itself. You now have member states who are in and those who are out. Now you have member states who want an action and member states who are reneging on such actions. Now this does not sound well. And not forgetting that we have other bodies like United Nations, we have the African Union. Themselves have not said much about this. So ECOWAS, and in all of this, ECOWAS has not been, he has been more of a toothless bulldog. It's just an association where people have there are no consequences and there are no sanctions for actions. It's just like an association where people gather. It has not been much of productive in its objective and in what it was set for.
So do you think they have any power here
now
to make a difference?
Just like every other state organizations, like we have the African Union, they can exercise their powers as it relates to their country. Now, there is no general sanction. Their sanctions do not carry weight. Whatever the sanction, countries might agree to defy them, and the punishments are not outright. Now, you look at sanctions that have been meted out to countries who defy these things. It makes mess of whatever sanction they intend to place or have placed. When countries are at liberty to pull out of trades, but that notwithstanding, both of you will lose at the end of the day. But you do not invade another man's country in the name of things that their internal problems and internal rifts. They've not crossed the Rubicons of their territorial areas. So it's still their internal problem, it's still their internal policies. The only thing is that you negotiate, you propose negotiation, but ECOWAS coming in at this point and then throwing in the towel and shouting sanction and brandishing wars here and there, it does not tell well for the member states, and it will certainly not cow any member, because every state in the ECOWAS list is an independent, is a sovereign state. It has its territorial definition, it has its jurisdiction and everything. So they are independent of each other. Now, the power that ECOWAS enjoy is derived from member states coming together. What now happens when member states refuse to come together? What then happens? The house is divided itself. And not forgetting, most of the issues the ECOWAS talks about and sanction about are things their member states are guilty of. There is no state in the ECOWAS region where you don't have internal conflict here and there. Name one. Nigeria, you talk about Togo, you talk about Niger, you talk about Burkina Faso. These are member states and they have, look at Cameroon. Cameroon has been having their internal conflict for the past 11 years. To you,
but the ones that are still under democratic constitutional rule, does it count even if they have
even
issues?
if those ones that have democratic constitutional rules, how have they fared? The process at which they are brought into power, is there any difference between the political queues and the military queues? Now, he who comes to equity must be able to come with clean hands. If you're asking a sovereign state who has chosen a bit of what's their intent as their government to this is a way we are proposing this, and this is, you must be on a clean slate yourself. You do not come in to brandish yourself and authority on a sovereign state that is managing its affairs when your own affairs, member states' affairs, are not properly managed. So in this instance, the ECOWAS came in too fast. They did not think through their sanctions. They did not think through the actions. As you can see, they gave a 7 days ultimatum. That ultimatum ended on Sunday. And now to what end? It makes mess of their authority. It does not. It means the next time anybody does anything and threats are being issued, reference will be made to this that just happened.
But do you think or what would you say is responsible for what we are seeing? It's becoming almost a pandemic. A lot of West African states are almost no longer under civil democratic rule. What's going on?
I agree with you, and it calls for a sense of consent. But if you look at the geographical trajectory of those things, you look at the Niger, you look at the Mali, you look at Burkina Faso, you look at Chad. They are on the same line of geographical location, and they are within the ECOWAS region. Now, it means we need to go back to the drawing board and ask the African leaders need to go back to the drawing board and ask themselves, what have we not been doing right? And to tell you, African leaders have gotten it wrong from the inception. Look at the mismanagement of their countries. Each country, there is no country that is bereft of this mismanagement. Every African country has fallen short of this thing. Their leaders squander their monies, and they are very reckless with their funds and their resources. Now, you see African countries being impoverished. You see African countries begging for aids, where we have raw materials lined up all over Africa. The world benefits and enjoys the resources that are within Africa. So why can't Africa on its own? Africa has all it takes. Now imagine with the abundance of resources that Africa has and its state has, and they are unable to tackle their own situations. They are unable to manage their resources. Notwithstanding, we have much more number of poor people than we have the rich people in Africa. In other Western world, at least they have the numbers are commensurate, and then we have people, at least the middle class have a very large number. The elite class has just a few numbers, in other words. But in Africa, we have almost 80% of our populace very hungry and in poverty. So now that asks you, with all the resources they have, and with the management of funds that are being witnessed in African states, now those in authorities live flamboyantly. How do you expect to be living that such flamboyant life, and your citizens are watching? Now it will get to a day, just like the poem wrote, that one day the falcon will no longer hear the falconer, and things will fall apart. So African leaders, if they intend to avert all this, first they must look inwards, reconsider their economic funds, reconsider their positions and what they have been doing, the squanders, the misappropriations, the mismanagement of resources, general resources of African states.
But let's talk about the system of government, like you are pointing out, civilian rule, democracy, politics, and so on. Are things any better under military government? Isn't it almost always that things are worse, or even not as good or as people imagine it to be? We see a lot of these coups. When it happens at the inception, the citizens, a number of them are excited, they're happy, and after a while it turns to tears, So are there even any better options for them to continuously want to take over from civilian rule.
Coup is not a good idea. Coup is not a good idea, but sometimes when it happens, it just becomes legitimate. When it happens, and countries will just accept, most countries will accept it. Now, coups are born out of interventions. Now, either good or bad, but they are born out of interventions. Persons who feel this government is no longer on the path of progress, on the path where it's supposed to be. Now, if you ask whether our military governments are better or not, there are instances where they are better and there are instances where they are not better. Now, if you look at let's take Nigeria for instance. Most of the things you're seeing today in Nigeria were done under the military regime. The things we enjoy, the states that you have, were created under the military regime. Now, the infrastructures that we mostly have, the Aso Rock, the places, all the places, infrastructures, most of the infrastructures that we have, the roads, were created under the military regime. It has its own ups and downs, but however, it's not a good thing. It's not something that countries should leverage on. But look at Libya, for instance. When Gaddafi was in charge, it was a military regime. Libyans had their resources, they had everything, and they had limitations as to what they do. The only thing is that under military regime, certain rights and certain privileges are washed off. You are subject to the military junta and then the military dictatorship. But not in some circumstances, it brings good. But in most circumstances, it smells doom as well. Now, I am not an advocate of coup in any way. But where it has become prevalent, the only thing we can advocate is for such government who are now in the hands of the military to give way to a civilian regime that can be able to set their country on the path of progress.
Just to cut in there, is there an aspect of this where people are not making the most use of the system of government or the type of government? For instance, like they say, democracy is largely based on politics. And people say politics is a game. So people say, when we are looking at solutions to problems, like you've mentioned, bad leaders, mismanagement of funds and resources and so on, why do people, the electorate, the other politicians, the people who feel they have the capacity, why don't they look at solutions such as playing the game better, such as, going out to vote, participation, listening to debates, picking a candidate, ensuring your vote counts? Why do a lot of people tend to go to the extreme that, if the person who is not the most qualified has emerged for this position, then let everything just, go up in flames? Do you think people are not considering the benefits in that no matter how bad a government is, you have the capacity, the freedom to remove, to select, to elect them? Are people overlooking this aspect of democracy?
Now, what we basically have in Africa is unfortunately dictatorships in KAFTAN and traditional ways. What we have in Nigeria and other African countries is not purely democracy. As much as we enjoy freedom, certain freedom, but you mostly see in African countries where the most government they have are government for family members. They are very nepotic and despotic. Now, these are authoritarian governments, government of dictators. It has nothing to do with just Nigeria. It has more to do with Africans. You see, Africans presume they practice democracy. But at the end of the day, you see that what they actually practice is dictatorship in disguise. Elections do not count. Resources are not apportioned as they ought to be. Now take for instance, look at Central African Republic. It's undergoing referendum now, instituted by their president, for a third tenure. Everybody wants to die on the seat. Look at Cameroon. Cameroon has been there for years. Look at Ghana. Look at some other African countries.
But I was just of course, and I think this makes the point I was trying to, buttress, which is that what you've described now almost happened in Nigeria, and The only reason it did not happen is because people stood against it. We hear of the stories of President Obasanjo attempting to elongate his tenure.
Exactly.
But it was stopped by other technocrats, other diplomats, and people checking their duties by not being able to stop those other persons. But before you answer, let's quickly take a call from one of our callers. Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Amadin. Good afternoon, Barista. You are on to SND from Lagos.
All right, thank you so much. Tell us your contributions.
Thank you very much, Barista, for your analysis. Amadi, let me put it this way. Remember, when Bazoum was elected, before he was the very day Bazoum was about to swear in, there is attempt to coup. There is attempt. I don't know whether you are aware of that. The very day Bazoum was about to swear in as the president of Niger Republic, there is an attempt. There is an attempt that very day. So this is to show you that Niger already has their political issue and the internal crisis when it comes to politics. That is my observation, number one. Secondly, maybe why Nigerians are wondering, bothering on this issue is because, you know, apart from Mr. President being the chairman of the ECOWAS head of state, we have almost 7 borders with Niger. So Niger is the closest neighbor in Nigeria, in Africa to Nigeria. So we must have to get worried. We must have to get, but the issue is, there is something I want us to put in place. How I wish when Ahmed Bola Tinubu, our able president, was elected as a chairman of that ECOWAS forum on the 9th of July 2023, the pronouncement he made that as from now on there is no any coup. He made mention a lot of things, that these are West African countries we are facing challenges of insecurity, terrorism, banditry, and so on and so forth. At the end, he made mention coup is not welcome. How I wish the head of ECOWAS puts this to their nature, to their countries, back to their countries, to make it in their constitution. And secondly, we should also look at what led to a coup in this our region. The issue is sometimes a leader will try to amend a constitution of his country just for him to be lifetime president or 3-time president or something of that nature. Who does that in a Western world? Answer me this question, Amadi. Who does that? You understand? Yeah. So there are so many things that contradict the issue, and the kind of government we are going into generally sometimes is intimidating. Right. We are not welcoming any coup. If you look at the Niger Republic Constitution 2010 and then amended 2027, this coup contravene the constitution of the Niger Republic itself. Now, go back to African AU. There is an issue, I think it's Article 2 if I'm not mistaken, an issue of this non-interference of national laws. International laws. You understand? So what do you want to do about that?
All right.
Also go to AU. There are so many issues. I could remember 2021, Niger pleaded on the ECOWAS to give them army because of terrorism. But what they say they don't have the manpower. They don't have the material. Why today are they ready for the materials and the manpower? You understand?
All right, thank you.
We are facing issues in Nigeria. 14 years of Boko Haram, 9 years of banditry, and we are still looking to go to Niger and make a war. No, who does that? There is diplomatic issue, there is international laws, and so on and so forth. So I think the ECOWAS need to sit down and think twice. And for me, to my own point of view, I think army issue should be off the table.
All right, thank you so much.
They should invite diplomatic issue, angle, so that they should deal with this issue. I believe Niger has their own issue right before now. Thank you very much. I remain SMB from Lagos.
Thank you so much, SMG. It's a pleasure to hear you speak. I guess you want to react to that.
Yes, I agree with him. And laws in constitutions, even in the Nigerian constitution, coup is a treasonable offense. It's amount to death penalty if you're found. But the thing is, an unsuccessful coup is treasonable. But a successful coup is normal. It is in every country. It is in most countries. When a coup is successful, now the first thing the coup plotters does is to suspend the constitution. So upon that, a decree is made, a decree is introduced. It is upon that the existence of that decree that they begin to operate. Then it is no longer the constitution but a decree that they operate. We've had coups in this country, and the moment a coup is successful, that such constitution is put into abeyance. Now, if an attempt to organize a coup is unsuccessful, it becomes an affront to the state and it becomes a treasonable offense. Now, if you are, just like the caller said, African countries need to look at, they need to go back and to the drawing board. I do not support the military invasion of Niger. What I expected the ECOWAS and African Union to do was, okay, these are things, you have made this attempt, okay, this is our proposition. If you do not, we expect that you, within this so time, return back to democratic rule. Either by conducting an election, a fresh election, or by returning whoever the hell you want to. It is their country's problem. It is an internal affair of their country. They have not extended their activities within the territorial boundaries of any other country. So it is still their personal problem. They should solve it. The only thing African leaders should do is to support them to return back to civilian regime. Either by means of an election, organized election, and let government return back to civilian regime. But if a country says that we do not want this person, look at the case of Niger.
But is that the country speaking, or is just the military? Now
look at the case of Niger. The populace have been all around the streets, happy and jubilating. It does not happen most times when there are coups.
But that doesn't represent the majority.
Now, the entire country is on the streets. It might not represent everybody in the country, but it means from the onset, like the caller said, upon assumption of office, there has been threat. And if you watched closely the election of the president, of Niger president, they had issues even in their election. So there were telltale signs of violence. There were telltale signs of things that were to come. So this thing that happened now there were clear signs that they were there. But then the country on its own has been mismanaged, it has been misgoverned, and they do not want this particular person. Now what the ECOWAS should have done is, okay, give them a time to organize an election that should bring in another person.
All right. I think we've dwelled on the Niger issue. Just for sake of time, let's quickly move over to the other topic of discussion for today, the ministerial screening. I'd like to get your thoughts on how the process has gone so far, and how best you think it has gone, and how do you think it could improve.
From the ministerial list, we could understand that we are not yet ready. I will say that with all certainty. From the list that has been submitted and from the persons that have been nominated, we are not yet ready. If we are ready, we will not be having 49 nominated senators, 49 nominated ministers. Now, if we were ready, we will not be having career politicians. You know, I almost had this belief that we were, when the president gave us the assurance that he was going to bring in technocrats. I expected persons either from the private sectors or persons who have managed the affairs and businesses and things as it relates to the know-how. Not governors, senators, and career politicians who has been jumping from one office since their adult age to another. Now, most of these persons have no idea of how things are run. They have no technical know-how. They either been nominated by one person or another. They've been career politicians all through their life. So, what technical knowledge are they bringing to the table? What I am happy with some nominations. There were some nominations that were perfect, like the nomination of Faboni, the nomination of Wale Edun, the nomination of Bosun. These are guys that have been there. They have been in the private sector, and then they've managed. We've seen them run things that are feasible. But you look at the other list is made up of either senators, ex-governors, and the rest.
Now, would you say some of those persons have also performed?
What have they performed? What have they performed? If you look at the individual states, where have they performed? Most of them have been career politicians all their life. And if we intend to cut the cost of governance, don't forget that Nigeria is broke, from what we were told by the finance minister. Nigeria is broke and bleeding. If we intend to cut the cost of governance and then manage on the resources that are available, do we intend to keep borrowing? No, of course not. We will get to a point where we'll be stuck with our debt. Our debt at the moment is more than it should be. Now, what are we looking at? If we're looking to set up a viable and productive system, we must be able to integrate the private sector. We must be able to bring persons, key players who have been in the corridors of the economy, not in the corridors of power. If you want politicians, take them to the party secretariats, take them to party congresses, let them contest in the party congresses, give them appointment in party positions, but not in national management.
Right. I know you're speaking to the capacity, but from a legal perspective, I also like to get your thoughts on the timing. I believe the president had about 60 days from inauguration to submit that list. He submitted the first half just before the deadline or on the deadline. But what about the name he submitted afterwards? What does that mean? What does it mean those ministers are invalid? What does the law really say?
By literal interpretation, the president is supposed to submit the ministerial list within those periods. Now, the word that was used there shall submit ministers. It did not say some ministers. It said ministers within 60 days. Now, by literal interpretation, the president must submit those names within 60 days. So if we are to go by what it is, if we are to interpret it wholly as it were, those names submitted after 60 days do not form part of the ministerial list. Now, not forgotten, if it were countries that had a very serious National Assembly, this should be a ground for even misconduct and impeachment
of the president.
Of course. The Constitution stipulates that you must appoint your ministers within 60 days. You know, say some ministers. Now, you had 60 days to arrange your cabinet. Even before you start campaigning, you should have your cabinet and persons who you identify. And after elections, you are given 60 days. But one problem with the law is that the law did not provide for penalties. So it's another toothless bulldog like our chapter 2 of the Constitution. Now, when such laws are made, laws should have consequences, it should have punishments. So whoever made this law did not intend it to apply. And the only way this law can apply is if we had good National Assembly. What if the president fails to appoint his ministers within 60 days? What will happen? With the current National Assembly that we have, do they have the balls to take on an impeachment proceeding?
All right, let's get into that. You've spoken about the capacity, you've spoken about the timing. What about the process of screening so far? What's your take on that? Do you think the Senate, they're doing a good job? Do you think they're giving those persons who will hold the reins of affairs the proper scrutiny they deserve?
The Senate has done a very poor job. A very, very, very poor job. Now, this is not how screening is. There are a lot of things we take for granted in this country. If you look at other, I believe you've watched other countries screening and all that. Look at in UK when you appear before the parliament. In US when you appear before the Congress. Now, you agree to the extent of your expertise. What do you bring to the table? what portfolio do you have? And I think we should also make it in a way that we attach portfolios to ministers that we appoint. So you know what somebody is being appointed and what his capacity to handle such position. Now, if I as a lawyer become appointed either as Minister of Health, I am not saying I might not be able to answer Minister of Health, but I might not function properly like someone who has knowledge about health and some related stuffs. Now, if as a lawyer I am appointed Minister of Works, I might not function optimally like an engineer who has the basic knowledge of what it is to function within our landscape. So now most times we have round peg in square holes as it relates to appointment. We should be able to have persons whose niche and capacity it is that they are appointing for. Right. You just like you cannot appoint a doctor to be an attorney general of the federation. I don't feel it is right to appoint a lawyer that just like we had in the last administration, where we had a lawyer as the Minister of Health. We had a lawyer as Minister of Works. Now this is an abnormal. It's an abnormal that should never repeat itself. Persons with technical know-how and track record within a sphere should be given that liberty, should be given a privilege to handle that such sector. It gives them that know-how to be able to function appropriately.
That's fair enough. It's interesting when you mentioned the Attorney General. I think we see a lot of lawyers, going into other ministries and other areas, but hardly do we see non-lawyers heading into the ministry. But just before you say that, let's take one more call on the program today. Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ahmad in SND. Barista, good afternoon. Let me contribute a little bit in this ministerial non-ministerial issue.
All right, go ahead.
Like Barista mentioned, sometimes I ask myself, are we ready? Because we are almost about 63 years of independence, 23 years of interrupted democracy, and then today we are seeing even some people, their names used to appear in our exams in our days in primary school, but they are still ruling the affairs of the nation, piloting issues. So the question is the time frame. The time frame is what matters. We have 1,461 days. Equivalent to hours, we have almost about 35,064 hours. Believe me, before all these days, that means if you do the calculation, you will see that the government has only 2 years to work. Because when it is 3 years, you will now, or 2 years, 8 months, they will now start proceeding on the issue of election. You understand? So going ahead of 49 ministers and so on and so forth, yeah, of course, we have to appreciate Mr. President when you do the political comparative analysis compared to what we have in the past. You say, yeah, he has done well because he spent 6 months without cabinet. That's number one. Secondly, there is no inclusion because this one we've seen people from opposition party married to the ministerial. But are they the right people? That's the question. Are they the right people? Does that mean that we don't have any other people who can do better than what we have on ground? And then secondly, the screening process. The Nigerians, 200 million plus Nigerians are expecting to hear what is going on. They call it screening. Maybe before the guest left the studio, we should differentiate or bring out the definition of screening. What we're seeing, is it screening or is it introduction? We need to identify. Because there is no how, because you are a governor for 8 years, then they will tell you go and go. Who does that? Did you mind as a Senate President to go into the state account of that very state? Did you follow up what happened in that very state? As a minister for 8 years or for 6 years, did you achieve your goals?
Right.
Understand? How many times we budgeted? We will make a budget that we cannot complete the budget. How many times?
All right. Thank you.
Do you mind to ask questions as a minister on social ministry before now? What what counts I don't know. Look at the former CBN deputy governor when he was interviewed. Look at the kind of answer he is bringing out to the extent that the Senate president has to tell him, well, hold on, we are going to give us assignment. We have something to do. I don't know that you get you get my point.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
When the deputy governor of CBN was responding to question, the Senate president has to tell him, hold on, please, you give us assignment. A lot has to do with the CBN Act and so on and so forth. You understand? So this is question. This is screening. I don't know. Maybe Barista will help us identify the word screening. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
SMD from Lagos.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've actually run out of time now. Thank you so much, SMD, for calling. But just to help, let me just read out a definition of screening. The evaluation or investigation of something or someone as part of a methodological survey to assess suitability for a particular role or purpose. We'll end with the question he asked, is this screening or investigation? That's all we can take for today. Thank you so much, Barrister Kelechi. It's been a pleasure. All right, that's all we can take on the program for today. Don't forget, the policy reaches you live from Abuja, 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. every weekday. See you tomorrow. Bye for now. I am Amadi Nogbewi.